Hello. We're going to start in a minute, just waiting for Manuel to join.
Hello, Isabella.
Hi, Manuel.
How are you? How's it going?
Very good, thank you. How are you?
You're fine. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you very well. Can you hear me too?
Yes, perfect. Crystal clear.
That is great. It's so nice to see you.
Yes, finally. We can see each other barely.
Yeah, it's been a while. Just some emails, right?
Yeah, indeed. Of course, we have only been in contact just by writing, so it's a good idea that we can see each other and have a good time together today.
Yeah, it's super nice. And we're just gonna wait for a couple of minutes for people to allow to join, and then
Sure.
we're gonna start properly.
Sure, of
So,
course.
you had a good day so far?
Yeah, I cannot complain.
Oh, seems like we have a connection problem. Let's see if we can get Manuel back.
Yeah.
Hello.
Back online. I don't know what happened. I didn't touch anything. Promise.
Maybe just the connection. I will send you another invite if it happens again.
Yeah, looks like I had some double video for some minutes. But
That's...
yeah. So it was good. I spent 1 week on Galicia, one part in the north of Spain, and having very good time with family and some friends. Actually, I was in touch with some artists that work with plastic collected at sea, precisely. So it has been quite nice to see what they are doing there in the north of Spain. Quite cool, actually.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
It's always cool to see what artists come up with, right?
Indeed.
Yeah, I think if you'd like to, we can properly start.
Sure, whenever you want.
Okay, then hello everyone. It's very nice that all of you joined. And today it's our pleasure to have Manuel Arias with us, an Earth observation scientist at the Institut de Ciències del Mar in Spain. Manuel's expertise lies in marine litter monitoring, where he employs optical sensors to detect and categorize marine debris. Not only is Manuel a specialist in the field, but he is also a co-founder and co-coordinator of the International Ocean Color Coordinating Group's task force. In his role, he provides valuable guidance to global space agencies and international organizations, contributing his knowledge and insights on marine litter remote sensing technologies. Manuel's contributions extend to the development of methods for plastic detection, collaboration on biological indicators of plastic pollution, support for plastic degradation studies, and active involvement in policymaking and citizen science. Thank you, Manuel, for being here with us today. It's a great pleasure to have you on. And this is basically a follow-up to our podcast that everyone can check out. If you have any questions, as in if the listeners have any questions, please do drop them in the comments because we will keep track of them and ask them to Manuel. And the first question we have for Manuel is, what led you to investigate ways to detect plastic in the ocean? What got you started?
Well, the first thing I want to say is thank you for the invitation and bringing me here. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to share some time together and discuss about this topic that, of course, I'm very passionate about. So I tend to talk too much. So if for any reason I take very long in answering, feel free to let me know that we need to move forward. It's okay. But said that, I'm going to answer to your first question. I think it's a very good question, and I would say that everybody has a different reason to start studying or being worried about plastic pollution in our oceans. To me, it comes from two sides of the problem. One is that I'm an environmental scientist, apart from oceanographer. So I work a lot with marine pollution and the impact also of climate change on the oceans. So I have a professional interest in new forms of pollution. And even if plastic has been around for almost 75 years, more or less, roughly, it has just come now as a new form of pollution in the last, let's say, 12 to 15 years, that this has been brought up to the table as a hot topic for us. And the second reason is personal, because of, as I was saying in the introduction, I know some artists that they work with recover materials from beaches, and one of those is my wife. And my wife has been entangled with this, collecting plastic litter at the beaches and coastal areas in several countries for some years, and doing some art with it. And she one day asked me, why not you try to do something about plastic pollution? And when I was working with satellites, plastic pollution appeared to be everywhere, so maybe you can do something about that, And actually, it was quite convenient and time that when we had this discussion, the European Space Agency brought up an opportunity to do studies of this type and trying to recognize or to identify the feasibility of using satellites for another forms of remote sensing for studying plastic pollution. And everything started to me, professionally speaking, from that point on forward.
That's a really, really cool thing that your wife is involved as well. I'm guessing she's very happy about your initiative now. So you mentioned that you work with satellites. So can you tell us a little bit more? What is remote sensing for marine litter? Can you describe the technology to people who don't know?
Of course, I can explain. Remote sensing is what we refer as a group of technologies that enable us to take measurements of things without being in contact directly with them. So in some ways, we are measuring indirectly different things in the environment. There are many applications of this, but one good example of remote sensing is astronomy. Most of the astronomic data is obtained indirectly, just by observing the light that comes out from the stars or planets or different bodies on the space. Similarly, we can use also quite similar instruments to study the surface of the planet and try to gather different types of information, like temperature, activity of plants, salinity of the seawater, mineral composition of the surface, extension of forests, and a very large, huge catalog of different things I can tell you. So marine litter is coming into this as one of the areas in which remote sensing can help and contribute to observe data precisely when we have issues, because of one of the difficulties we have with marine litter is that we actually don't know exactly how much litter is floating in our oceans. And part of the reason why we don't know is because of we don't have the right means to actually measure all the surface of the ocean with, let's say, spatial and temporal coverage good enough for us to really have a good idea of how much litter is there, no? So one of the recommendations of the United Nations from almost 10 years ago now is to bring into the table remote sensing tools which can complement observations that other scientists and teams are doing on the field, and many countries also in the European Union, especially, and European countries, they have some commitments with some important committees like the OSPAR agreement and also the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which they also introduce some obligations to those countries to monitor marine litter and plastic pollution in particular. And remote sensing is one of those tools that can complement the national efforts to monitor this form of pollution on beaches, on rivers, and of course coastal areas and ocean waters.
That sounds really interesting. So you're basically looking from a space perspective and detecting marine litter. So marine litter comes in all sizes and forms. And there's also the topic of microplastic that by now probably everyone has heard about. And microplastics are plastics that have come from bigger objects and then they break apart. We all know by now that most plastics aren't biodegradable and they just break into smaller pieces until you can see them in the microscope. And yeah, so the question that is there actually the option and possibility to also see those tiny microplastics from space?
Well, we need to understand a couple of things on this. The first one is that we have different remote sensing technologies. So I didn't mention before, but it was in your question. And we can use instruments on board of satellites, but also on board of airplanes, on board of drones, or even place it in fixed positions like bridges or in poles next to a beach, things like that. So if you can put a camera on it, you can also do any kind of remote sensing practically with this. There are, of course, some particular platform related limitations, particularly in what goes in the amount of weight that each of the platforms can deal with, the power that can administrate to the corresponding devices. So not every observing technology is available for every single platform, okay? However, it's important to link this with your question for one reason. It is not always the size what matters, it is the quantity what matters. We have very tiny particles of plastics, but they are available in large enough quantities, they can introduce a change in the surface of the ocean that we can see from space or from large distances. And quite often the distance for this type of things is an advantage, because of when the changes are subtle, having a bigger perspective out of the space helps you to see really the changes in the color in the ocean between different parts, and then you can try to identify what is happening. This is what we do for plankton, for instance, for phytoplankton from space, one of the oldest applications of optical remote sensing data. But if we really want to know what each individual item is, then we really need to be quite close to the target. So, for instance, if we really want to identify this is a bottle, this is a cup, this is a spoon or a plastic bag, then we really need to be much closer to the surface in order to be able to identify them. And to that aim, we really need to use other technologies that are closer, like drones. Drones are very good for this, and actually are being used extensively nowadays to study plastic litter on beaches. But airplanes also can help because they can have quite powerful cameras with a very high spatial resolution, and therefore we can identify well what objects we have in the surface. So that's the message. It depends on the quantity, and it depends on what we want to do with it. That we should use one technology or other to study plastic pollution.
Thank you so much for the really great answer. I have I'd like to say again, if anyone who is listening has a question or a comment, they are really free to write them in the comments and we will pick up on it. As we already have a submission of a question, and it's, how deep can the remote sensing technique see? You mentioned it can pick up on plastic on the surface, but how deep does it actually go? And yeah, to which depth of the sea, basically?
Yes, I mean the main issue we get is related in how deep we can go is related to the amount of light. So in a sense, the deeper an object is within the water, the less light gets into the object, is reflected and gets back to the atmosphere, and we can see it with instruments, right? So this is a strong limitation in terms of what we can do with remote sensing. And the main reason why I talk about floating litter is because that is the optimal target that we can see with current technologies. Now, we have some potential instruments and technologies that we are working on and trying to develop further as community that could help to see plastic in deeper waters. A good example is LiDAR. LiDAR operates quite similar to a radar. The only difference, or the main difference, let's say not the only one, but the main difference is that it uses a laser as source of light. Because this laser, it has a much stronger source of light than the sun for a given point, then it's able to report litter that is present within the water column, just by getting light that is reflected by all these pieces that are floating in the middle waters, let's say. But in the worst, in the best case scenario, we are talking about very few meters. So we are talking about 20, 30 meters tops, even using this type of LiDAR technologies. And if we don't use this type of technologies, we are much more limited and probably to the surface and just a few centimeters below the water. And other reason related to this limitation is how we can classify or detect plastic litter out of other things that are in the surface. And to do that, we need to look at the light that is reflected from them, but not only in the part of the light spectrum that we can see, not only the visible light. We use also other parts of the light, especially something that we call infrared radiation, which is related to the composition, molecular composition of the substances. And unfortunately, water is a very strong absorber of infrared radiation, which means that very little infrared radiation can be observed below the first millimeters or centimeters of the water, which means that we have strong limitations to see anything that is just below the surface. But the future, we are working on it. As I said, is trying to use this type of LiDAR technologies, which also we have some hopes, and in laboratory we have already demonstrated it works, to detect microplastics in suspension in the water, which is one of the most challenging aspects for obtaining data. And thanks to some particular properties of these microplastics, when they are bombarded with some strong light, in a specific some wavelengths of the light, then we can get them to fluorescence, and if we measure that fluorescence, we can also estimate their composition, identify they are plastic. So, so the future is coming. Hopefully, we'll have something better to observe plastics in the water column in the years to come.
That's really interesting. So to summarize for everyone who might not be up to date with the physics of lights and colors, lights comes in wavelength, and there is a different wavelength basically for every color that we can perceive, and this is a spectrum. And outside the spectrum, we can have other lights that we cannot perceive with the human eye, which would be UV and infrared, and that is basically what you can also use. And if you stimulate something with a high enough frequency of light, then you can also cause it to fluorescent, and that one you can also pick up with your technology, right? That's like,
yes, that's entirely correct.
Yeah, that's just like the summary for people who don't know how colors work. And it's really interesting that you can use this for science. And you've been collecting all this data now for quite a while. And the question is, what can we do with this data that you are collecting? How can it help the conservation actions?
Well, the purpose of our data is, as I said when we were discussing about the reasons why we really want to use remote sensing, is to complement existing information on ground. So because we cannot cover entirely the surface of the ocean, or we cannot observe it all the time, getting, let's say, some automatic tools that can get that data for us with the help of, well, advanced algorithms that process the data that these instruments generate, it's a great asset to complement those observations. And one of the main reasons why we want to do this is, as I said, to complement or to complete, let's say, better complete the whole map of plastic pollution in our planet, which we don't know. And there are a lot of areas that we have not yet observed because we are not having in-ground observations or people contributing to those measurements, or because of those happen very rarely from time to time, which is not sufficient, especially in a medium so dynamic like the ocean, to really understand how much pollution we have in this place. No. The other main reason to do this is to have a way to track whether we are introducing, if measurements that we are introducing to mitigate plastic pollution and reduce the dumping of plastic into the environment are actually working or not. So for policy making, this is very relevant because you just don't want to create a law or a regulation or something. You really want to have tools that can help you to know whether that regulation that has been put in place is actually working. And to do that, you need to be able to monitor on time the amount of litter that you are having in a particular area along the time, and with enough occurrence of data for you to really have an idea of the trends and on the spatial distribution, which are two key areas in which the European Commission has acknowledged there are still substantial gaps. So those are our main two purposes when we are trying to work in those tools. And we are already generating some data. Different groups are doing this. I'm leading one of those, but there are other people working on this idea in other agencies. And the purpose of those data processing that we are doing is to really get a consistent map on time. But this is a huge effort because of there is a lot of data collected from space, and it's very hard to process due to the data volume. We are talking about terabytes of data, which takes a lot of months to process even a small area. So we are also trying to be smart about how we do this, and more and more often we are closing the gap by leveraging efforts through high performance computing centers and supercomputing facilities.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense when you're collecting this amount of data to seek help somewhere else.
Yes.
It would keep the scientists very busy to just process a tiny part of it in an adequate amount of time. And so we've talked about collecting the data with the optical sensors. And now the question is, how do these sensors work? Do they, for example, see through clouds? And what are other challenges when it comes to detecting and measuring marine litter?
One of the main challenges you just mentioned are clouds. So there are different types of sensors. As we have said before, some operate using visible light, but others use light that are in a different parts of the spectrum, ultraviolet, infrared, or even microwaves, which is the same region of the spectrum that we use for the radio, right? Or for GPS and many other sensors. And so not all the light frequencies are impacted the same way by the atmosphere. And in particular, for ultraviolet and visible light, the atmosphere can be quite a strong effect. It can be up to 95% of the total final of the measurement, yes. And if we have clouds, we cannot see anything below the clouds. In order to make sure that the atmosphere is transparent, you need to go to the radio frequencies. You need to go to microwaves and things like this. But they don't have capability to discriminate what we see at the surface. They only can tell you there is something, but they cannot say what it is. And to do that, we really need this optical data, this range of observations that we do from ultraviolet to the infrared, in order to collect enough bands, as we call them, enough different parts of enough different images at different parts of the light spectrum, in order to classify what it is in the surface. And the second challenge, apart from clouds that obviously prevent this to be observed, is doing this classification. Because there are many things floating in the ocean, or that are parts of the seawater. I mentioned before phytoplankton, but we have also plankton. And we have many land-based materials floating, like driftwood or leaves, that quite often happen after strong rainfalls in land, in coastal areas. We have sediments, etc. We have ships. We have also oil leaks, and that is another form of marine pollution. Quite dramatic also, as you can know.
That's true.
So we have many elements there, and we have to do first detection. So answering the question, is there something in here or not? Yes, there is something. And now the next question is classification. What is this? Is this plastic? Is this driftwood? Is this seaweed? What is this? And to do that, you really need to have quite a good number of spectral bands, as I have mentioned before, to perform the classification. It also requires a lot of laboratory experiments in order to learn well what characteristics each of the materials have, so you can exploit those characteristics to do the classification. And the third challenge is quantification, which quite often is the most difficult one. And this involves not just detecting that a given pixel of the image has the right spectral information, but also knowing how much of that pixel really corresponds to what you want to see and how much is something else. And this spectral separation, this classification at pixel level, it's what really we aspire to obtain, because then you can quantify and say, okay, we have this surface of the ocean covered by plastics and things like this.
Mm-hmm. So there are really many steps involved for making a statement, like 20% of the oceans are covered by plastic. Like, we cannot say that right now.
No,
That
no,
was
no,
just
we
a
cannot.
number I made up, but for the example of it. And
luckily
so
not,
you
it's
said...
not so big as 20%.
So we already spoke about having various types of marine litter. You also mentioned oil pollution just now, oil leaks, and we at Healthy Seas are quite busy with a certain topic of marine litter, which is ghost gear. It's defined as lost, discarded, or otherwise abandoned fishing gear that keeps on fishing in the oceans without human supervision. And the question, of course, is can you also use this technology to detect ghost gear?
It is not the first time we have got that question, because of course there is a lot of interest in remote sensing of ghost nets and trying to identify them using the type of tools that I have just mentioned before. And obviously the main reason is because this is probably the most damaging form of plastic pollution in the ocean so far we are aware of. We don't know yet well what is the ecological impacts of other forms of plastic pollution, but ghost nets, they are behind the killing of many marine animals and destruction of not a small fraction of the fish stock that we are interested on as humans for feeding the planet. Yeah. So there are thousands of millions of dollars estimated every year that are destroyed by ghost nets. So there is a huge interest in trying to mitigate the maximum of this problem and, as possible, identify ghost nets, and when this is possible, get them out of the water. However, detecting them is not easy, and that's the reason I mentioned before about the limitations of the water column, is that as the right light that we need to do automatic classification from space or from drones or from airplanes is not reaching quite deep into the ocean, and a big part of the most optimal light that we need to visualize, let's say this ghost net, is absorbed by the water. It's very hard to see them, and actually from space is not affordable. Unfortunately, it's not within the current limits. But we have done some testing in the past using airplanes, especially the Ocean Cleanup some years ago did a flight in the North Pacific garbage patch, and they managed to do some LiDAR using the technology I mentioned before, using lasers and cameras imagery in order to see what can be seen from there. And if you have airplanes, you can use cameras on board to identify ghost nets. And of course, drones could be also being able to identify them by flying operated from ships, for instance, could be a good option. But both airplanes and drones on ships tend to be quite expensive solutions. So ideally, we should find alternative methods to solve this problem for identifying ghost nets. But it is a bit hard to do with our current technologies. Hopefully, this will be one of the main areas in which we will develop further in the coming years. And but as far as of today, how we stand today on this, you don't need to rely on observations from airplanes or drones operating from ships.
Thank you so much. That's really, really interesting, and also to hear which kind of challenges are being faced when it comes to detecting ghost gear. So we all know ghost gear is mostly made of plastic these days, unfortunately, and therefore it will break down into microplastics. We have talked about microplastics, and you are active on the topic of microplastics as well. So why does microplastic matter? Does it have an effect on marine animals? It is very, very small.
Microplastics, we define them as any single plastic object below 5 millimeters. And the main reason why we choose that arbitrary number is because of there is something that we call pellets or nardelles, which are small balls of plastic, which are oftenly generated in the plastic industry as precursors of other plastic materials. And those pellets usually are typically below 5 millimeters, and they are transported at sea quite often. From time to time, there are containers being dropped at sea, and then you get a good amount of those pellets in the ocean. So those small pellets are appearing almost everywhere. And this is one of the reasons why they were taken as a reference for microplastics. There is another practical reason which is related to the methods in which we sample plastic at the ocean surface, and is that we use some specific nets and that they have, let's say, a particular size in the holes that permits or not one object to go through in or not and be retained by the net. So those below 5 millimeters require some specific net to be captured. Otherwise, you could not see them easily. The main issue with the microplastics is that they are not how to say this, very easy to control. And as you said well before, they are just on a stage before they break down even in the smaller particles. We are talking also about nanoplastics. There are a very good number of studies on the topic. But nanoplastics, which they are going the scale of microns, so we are talking about thousands of parts of 1 millimeter, they can be even get smaller and smaller than that. And we don't know really what it is the consequences for animals or even humans of getting those very tiny particles entering into our bodies, which they may interfere with some cellular activities. And there are ongoing studies about this, and to learn really what are the effects of those. However, we know about a few things. And one of the things that we know is that plankton, especially zooplankton, they are tiny animals floating in the surface of the ocean, in the water column, in the first 100 meters of the water column mainly, that they eat many particles that are just floating in there. And they don't tend to be very discriminative in that area, and they tend to ingest almost everything that they can swallow in order to optimize the amount of food that they can get. And quite often they get these microplastics. There are already studies showing that zooplankton actually eats plastic. And this is a problem because of as they cannot digest this type of particles, they can die. and they also can suffer of having to put energy in trying to digest something that they cannot actually digest to just throw it out. And then they are wasting precious resources for them to grow. So we expect that large quantities of microplastics in the ocean can clamp down the degree of success of the larvae and small animals in the zooplankton that usually will not have this issue when plastic is not present. We don't have, however, proper estimates until, about how much damage is coming into these type of organisms coming out of that. But it is important. And the third aspect is that is also very relevant is that plastics can be also helping to transfer toxic substances from to the animals and to humans, of course, that are eating those particles. Quite often, plastics have additives, and the additives, even if they are part of the plastic in itself, they can be released on time due to degradation of the plastic or due to enzymatic activity from organisms operating in the surface of the plastic. Okay, some bacteria can create this or to help you to release this type of additives. And some additives are toxic or bad for health. And of course, when they are, let's say, they can be incorporated into the fat of animals. They can, or into the muscles. They can remain in the long time in the meat of the animals and accumulate there, which eventually can make them sick or can make them not healthy for us to eat. Once more, we don't have proper estimates of the magnitudes of this type of contamination in marine life, but there are a good number of research groups that are operating in this line and trying to better understand this type of impact. And other form of chemical issues that plastic can create is that they are not only transparent additives, is that the chemical substances can get attached to the surface due to the properties of the plastics and help to transport them to animals that otherwise would be safe out of those. And this is also something that is part of toxicity studies that many groups are doing.
Oh, wow, thank you so much. So the problems we have in microplastics is that they are just about to break down into even smaller particles that we don't know the impact of, and that they might be toxic by themselves, or even have additives added to the plastics that modify its properties, so it's more useful for humans in the first moment, but then as it breaks down, it might be released. It enters the food chains through plankton, through bigger fish, and might in the end up on our own table, and we might not know, or we don't know what these chemicals and plastics do to us in the long term, because there are no studies being done on this. So there are biodegradable plastics, or plastics that are labeled biodegradable. What should people be aware of when it comes to products labeled as biodegradable plastics?
Well, one of the main issues is that because how we have been taught at schools what biodegradable means, we tend to be misled by the term when we see it in products. So, for instance, when we see something made of a form of plastic or that says it's biodegradable, we tend to think, oh, if I throw this to the environment, it will just degrade on time and will be fine. So that removes responsibility on the consumer about what happens with the item once he or she or whoever drops them into the bin or into the environment, which is unfortunate because of what the legal term actually means is that under industrial conditions, that item can be biodegraded, which comes to the fact that some of them can be composted, but using some specific conditions that not necessarily happen in nature. They need to happen in some industrial facilities. And this is a bit of misleading information that quite often leads to people to believe that if the biodegradable label is present, the plastic can be okay if it's in the environment, which is not the case. So the best thing that users can do is to really get proper information before deciding whether a given plastic item is actually biodegradable and safe to release, or should be taken care of with the right tools and put in the right location. No? So my recommendation is always put all forms of plastic into the containers garbage, because of there you maximize the opportunities that will be recycled or destroyed before it goes to the environment, which is important. And within bioplastics, we have some art of vegetable origin. I would say that most of them, actually, that they come from different types of fibers and so on. So looking at the composition, actual composition, is also helpful to see whether they will be actually degradable or they should fall into this, as I say, gray area of depositing of them in the official places, so that can be handled properly. But I think it's important to be aware of this. And the European Commission and the European Union are putting a lot of effort in improving labeling, and also make sure that industry follows good practices, so consumers can actually know exactly what they are buying and what it is expected impact that it may have. But as you can imagine, it's not a simple task to perform. And I think it's improving on time, but actually is one of the hot topics in terms of circular economy that is very discussed, because of it's not just a matter of putting a green label. You also need to make sure that this always to the reality, and that consumers are not misled by information that can look like something when it's actually not that.
Yeah, that is very true. Like, people see the term biodegradable and they think it's just easy to break down and it will go away again. But as you just said, it's mostly defined under industrial scale conditions, and yeah, these might be different, especially if these biodegradable plastics end up in the sea. It's much colder there. There is no UV
Correct.
radiation from the sun. So studies have been done on plastic bags being submerged in deep water conditions to see how long it actually takes to biodegrade. And some of these results are really interesting because there might not be any degradation at all after a couple of months, depending on the circumstances that the bag is exposed to. So this is really helpful for everyone to know that biodegradable doesn't mean it goes away within 2 weeks of actually disposing of it. And you might look into disposing it into plastic recycling facilities. You might want to look into what is this biodegradable bag actually made from. And we also heard that the Instituto de Ciències del Mar is involved in studying the detection of plastic ingestion in turtles without actually requiring an autopsy, as in the examination of the corpse. Can you tell us about its use and its application?
Yes, this is important because of actually this question links also quite well about what type of reactions microplastics can cause in organisms. And one of the things that our research center discovered is that turtles that are ingesting plastic, when those pieces are small enough, which may happen just because of they are exposed directly to microplastics, or because when they are eating other forms of plastic, they break them down by chewing, etc., and digestion process in much smaller parts. When those enters into the organism, it causes that the organism tries to get rid of them, which is normal. I mean, our bodies try to do this when they see something that is foreigner to our organism that they cannot handle well. They try to just get rid of it, and to do that, turtles they try to segregate some enzymes that are meant to help to, let's say, or to try, better say more than help, to try to degrade those microparticles that are present in their blood and in their organism. So as the enzymes are in the blood, actually we can obtain blood samples of living turtles and then measure the concentrations of those enzymes and then guess what is the level of plastic exposure that they have got, which is great because actually turtles, as you know, is one of the main superior animals at the ocean that are victim of plastic pollution quite often, as unfortunately they tend to eat especially bugs, and quite often they can die if they eat them in large numbers or in large quantity. But also sometimes they just get entangled on it, in bugs, in nets, and they cannot go back to the surface to breathe, and then they just suffocate. So getting means to measure whether turtles are exposed to plastic pollution is also a very good idea to try to understand better the overall impact of plastic into the marine ecosystems. But also because we can tag turtles, we can put them, these GPS trackers to know what they are doing and where they are. By combining with blood sampling, we can also know what areas of the ocean these animals are being exposed respect to what areas they are in. And this is also a good idea to learn what areas of the ocean may have this form of pollution, and it helps the governments and also environmental organizations to drive policies to understand better, okay, these species are being impacted maybe in these regions. We really need to do something to mitigate this impact by specific regulations in those particular regions. And also to introduce means to prevent the turtles to eat plastic in first place. Of course, the easiest way would be to make sure that the plastic is not ending in the ocean in first place. But okay, this is one of the indirect ways that some smart people are putting together in order to help us to better understand the plastic pollution and what impacts they may have.
Thank you so much. That's really, really interesting. And one of our viewers says, thank you for telling us about the research on turtles. It is really interesting. And that's just a quick reminder from my side for the audience. Do you have any questions or comments? Write them down now in the comment section, because we have one last question for Manuel, and he will still have maybe some time to also answer your questions. So if you have some, let us know. And now, Manuel, we have the last question from our side, which is the Institut de Ciències del Mar is among the organizers of the Our Decade conference in Barcelona. What should we expect from that event and this kind of events in general?
Well, the Ocean Decade from the United Nations is, as the name it says, is a period of 10 years from 2020 to 2030, which there are specific sustainable goals associated to the oceans. And then the United Nations is trying to foster initiative and international cooperation to try to tackle them. I'm not going to go through all of them, but obviously plastic pollution is one of the areas in which we have specific goals to work with. And the idea of this, of course, is to leverage, let's say, to put together all human power as our able to tackle those threats, which are huge, not only for the environmental health of the ocean, but also because they may have a huge impact in human activities in the short, medium, or even long term. And the idea of this ocean conference is to create particular forums, so for people to discuss, and including all type of stakeholders. So in this type of forums, we have from the research community to citizen organizations, NGOs, we have industry representatives, we have regulators, policymakers, all levels of the society are pretty much represented in those conferences, and it's very interesting because of it's one of the few opportunities in which people doing very different things and for very different reasons can put together and discuss about how we should proceed to tackle those environmental problems. As I said, plastic pollution is one, but we have also, of course, all related to climate change and about preserving ecosystems, about fighting acidification of the ocean, which is also a huge issue. And so there are many different topics to be covered. And the idea of the conference here in Barcelona this time, because the previous session was happened in Lisbon in 2022. So in 2024 is going to happen in Barcelona, and we aim to show what has been the progress made in the last 2 years with respect to what was discussed in Lisbon, and how we have progressed towards those sustainability objectives that we have for the ocean, aiming to really make a huge dent in this type of environmental issues for 2030. So everybody is welcome to come, and I think they are still open for subscriptions to the conference. So if anybody in the audience is interested, I invite them to check in Google Ocean Decade Barcelona 2024, and they will find all the details that they may want.
That sounds really, really good, and I'm very excited to see what the outcomes are. Thank you so much, Manuel. This was really, really interesting information. It showed how science is important for marine conservation actions and how technology can work hand in hand for marine protection. We actually do have one last question, if you
Sure.
will still be up to it. Except recycling and more heavily regulated laws about littering, do you think that there is an efficient way of preventing plastics from arriving at sea?
Cutting plastic production. That would be quite dramatic, but actually it's probably the main way to do it. The recycling of plastic is a huge challenge. It's one of the main reasons why a large quantity of it ends up into the environment, because it's not easy to recycle. I mean, we are discussing plastic, but we don't discuss aluminium, and the main reason why we don't discuss aluminium pollution is because aluminium you recycle up to 99%, almost 95%, something like this, depending on the country. Mm-hmm. So it's easy to recycle, whereas plastic is very difficult to recycle. So when we want to regulate, the main two ways to do it is by reducing production, by reinforcing regulations to avoid the use of single plastic. And this, probably in the terms of the plastic, is the main thing that we can do, because single plastics items are composing huge parts of the plastic items that we can find at sea and in the beaches. So they are not that many in terms of the variety, so we can really try to target them. And actually the European Union, with a single plastic use ban, is trying to do this, even though implementation in different countries is very uneven, and there are very funny interpretations of the law. So this is not being done as seriously as it should be, but there have been clear progress in some of those topics. So those are the two main areas, I would say. So reduction, well, of course, the third one is educating people. By educating people, creating awareness about this environmental issue, we can also help people taking the right choices in terms of what they consume, and also how they dispose of the plastic items that they don't know anymore, and reducing this form of pollution too. So I would say those are the three main ways to deal with this.
Yeah, that sounds really, really good. And we have a very, very last question from the audience. Can you use remote sensing techniques to track illegal activities at sea? For example, illegal fishing?
Indeed, it is done. And actually, there are some recent publications, I think, not long ago, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, in which some people use a type of satellite instrument that we call SAR, synthetic aperture radar. It is an actual radar, similar to what are used in the military or for aviation, with some particularities, but basically operates like a radar. And with radars, we can detect ships. And then crossing that information with a device that many ships have, which is called AIS. AIS is a kind of a meter that helps to any other ship to know where a ship is. It's one way to avoid accidents by collisions. So many ships, especially the big ones, have this device, which means that they are sending a signal to a satellite to tell, I am here. And then that information is sent to all of the other ships, so they can know where the other ship is, okay? Well, something that happens with illegal fishing is that people that do these activities, they have AIS, and they switch it off when they want to do the illegal activity, so they cannot be monitored. So by crossing the information of the detections done using SAR on board of satellites with the IIS information, we can track what ships are volunteering switching off these devices, and then we can spot potential infractors of international laws in terms of illegal fishing. Of course, you cannot be 100% sure because there are many reasons for someone to deactivate the AIS, and not necessarily is related to illegal activities. So, for instance, you can think in people navigating in waters where there are piracy or pirates activity. You may not want to be seen easily, so you will switch off your AIS to prevent this, because otherwise you are telling them where you are.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
Yes, so there are many reasons for ships to switch it off, but it is a good indicator when you get ships that are going to fishing areas that are known, more or less, and then switching off the AIS and then coming back, and then getting back to ports. No, one way also to do this is that the AIS also sends information about the nature of the vessel, and if it's a fishing vessel, you will know. So it is also one way to complement the information. But yes, actually, we can do this, and it is very done.
That's really cool, and will hopefully bring some great changes also around marine protected areas that are frequently used by fishers when fishing vessels, unfortunately, targeted, and right at the border of it, they somehow disappear and then they reappear a couple of hours later, which is really interesting. And yeah, let's wrap it up. I have a couple of comments from the audience. Isa saying thank you. Also, Samara, thank you, Manuel. Great podcast and great life here. Thank you. Keep up the good work. Selena says, thank you, you two. We have someone else saying, thank you both for this really interesting Q&A. It was really well done from both sides. And also Joe thanking you, and he hopes to see more live Q&As. It's a great way to educate, and like Manuel mentioned, creating awareness is great. Thank you both for your time. And we, from our side, are very grateful for you and your colleagues' work. Knowing where the plastic accumulates will be very useful and important for cleanup initiatives, but also politics. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. We hope you had a really good time. If you have any other questions or thoughts, please write them in the comments. We will reply to these even after the live event has finished now. So if you want to hear more about remote sensing and marine litter detection, tune into our podcast. The link is posted in the comments, and it's a really great episode. I listened to it myself, of course, so I can only highly recommend it. Thank you so much, Manuel, for all your time, expertise, and the willingness to share this with the public as to raise more awareness around it.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Thanks a lot to you, Isadora, for bringing this opportunity and for the time, and especially to the audience who really are the ones who are making this type of things possible. So I'm grateful for you guys for listening to us and bringing this chance to explain you what we are trying to do from a scientific point of view, hopefully making a big change with the small contributions of everybody, which is at the end the objective.
Yeah, thank you, as said, and it was great to have you on. And yeah, I hope to talk to you soon in the future.
We
See
will, for
you,
sure.
and yeah, thanks everyone who is watching. We will now close the live stream and we'll then share it to our feed so you can go back and watch if you just joined at the later end of it. Thank you. Have a great day or evening, depending on where you are based, and see you soon. Bye.
Bye.